4 muzzles, fanned out across the front of a pistol small enough to disappear inside a coat pocket. Not stacked, not rotating. Splayed, like a hand of cards, like the foot of a duck. Underneath them, London proof marks, and on each barrel, a number stamped into the metal. 1, 2, 3, 4. Numbered, because each of those barrels is in every way that matters a separate gun. Pull the trigger once, and all 4 fire in the same instant, and then nothing. For the next several minutes, the most dangerous thing in that room is not the man holding this pistol. It's everyone standing in front of him. Somebody paid a small fortune for that trade. These were expensive to produce, and genuine examples are rare. This was not a cheap gun bought in a panic. It was commissioned, engraved, bought on purpose, a weapon that empties itself in a single heartbeat, in an era when reloading took longer than most fights lasted. That wasn't an oversight. That was the point. So start with what a man in 1790 was actually carrying. A flintlock pistol held 1 ball. 1. To reload it, he had to measure powder, seed a ball, ram it home, then prime the pan and close the frizzen. The better part of half a minute with steady hands, in good light, with nobody moving toward him. Under any other conditions, the number that mattered wasn't how many shots he had. It was how many he'd get. And the answer was 1. Against 1 opponent, that's a fair fight. Against 6, it's arithmetic. And in Britain, arithmetic was the threat. Before an effective police force existed, and one didn't, not until the 1840s, order in the street was enforced by the street itself. A crowd would assemble to deal with anything from petty theft to murder, a direct descendant of the medieval hue and cry. Sometimes that meant a handful of people harassing one person. Sometimes it meant a mass of bodies large enough to turn society upside down, the way it did in revolutionary France in the 1790s. You could not shoot your way out of that. 1 ball against a crowd isn't a defense, it's a formality. Now take that same problem and put it somewhere it can never leave. A ship at sea is a closed system. A merchant captain didn't visit that arithmetic occasionally. He lived inside it. 30 men, 40, 60. He slept behind a door every one of them walked past. He gave orders that could get people flogged, and he gave them to men who had nowhere to go and nothing to lose but the voyage. And unlike a naval vessel, a merchant man carried no marines. There was no detachment of armed men aboard whose job was to stand between the captain and the crew. Discipline was whatever he could enforce personally with whatever he happened to have on him, and the space itself made it worse. Below deck, the overhead is low enough that a grown man walks bent. The passages are shoulder width. Distance is measured in arm's lengths, not yards. There is no room to retreat, no cover, no angle. If it starts down there, it starts at conversational range, and it is over in seconds. That is the exact problem this pistol was built for. Not a duel, not a battlefield. A confined space, a wall of people, and 1 man with 1 trigger. And it wasn't the first attempt at solving it. The Royal Navy had already tried at full size. Around the time of the Napoleonic Wars, the London gunmaker Henry Knock built a 7-barreled gun that fired 7.50 caliber balls simultaneously, intended for repelling boarders or clearing an enemy deck ahead of your own men going across. 7 barrels, 1 trigger. Fired from the fighting tops or across a rail into a crowd of men who had nowhere to dodge. On paper, it's the perfect answer. In practice, the recoil was immense, enough to make it a punishing weapon to actually use. 7 charges detonating at once against a shoulder that was designed to absorb one. The Navy had proven the concept and simultaneously proven that the package was wrong. But the idea didn't die. It just changed size. Somewhere in the same period, somebody looked at a volley gun and made it small. Small enough to carry every day. Small enough that a man could stand in a passageway with it hidden and produce it in half a second. And here's where it stops being a scaling exercise. Because on a single-barrel flintlock, the sequence is beautifully simple. 1 spark, 1 pan, 1 charge. 4 barrels means 4 separate charges sitting in 4 separate chambers, and every one of them has to catch in the same instant. Not in sequence, not a fraction of a second apart. Together. Do that with 4 locks and 4 triggers, and you've built something the size of a brick that no one can operate under stress. So the man who designed this didn't build 4 locks. He built one and then solved the whole problem somewhere nobody was looking. Not in the mechanism, in the metal behind it. The answer is a slab of metal, and almost nobody looks at it twice. Take a duck's foot pistol and imagine the barrel's gone. What's left is disappointingly ordinary. It's a box-lock pocket pistol, the most common concealed handgun of the age, the kind of thing a merchant carried through a bad street. Flat sides. Cock mounted in the center, small enough to close a hand around. The only thing that isn't ordinary sits directly in front of the priming pan, a broad breech plate. A thick block of metal fixed across the front of an otherwise unremarkable gun. That block is the whole invention. Drilled into it are 4 separate chambers, each angled outward on its own line. Each one is a complete firing chamber, its own powder, its own ball, its own barrel screwed down over the top of it. And from each chamber, a narrow vent runs back through the metal to a single point. 1 pan, 4 channels, 4 guns. That's the mechanism the entire weapon depends on. Not gears, not linkages. Holes. To load it, you take the gun apart. Every barrel unscrews from the block. So you turn off barrel number 1, tip powder into the small chamber underneath, and set a lead ball down into the cup, a ball deliberately made oversized, wider than the bore it's about to sit in. Then you screw the barrel back down on top of it. There's no ramrod in this process. There's no patch, no wadding, nothing rammed down from the muzzle. Threading the barrel back onto the breech is what seats the ball. And because the ball is too big for the bore, the metal has to bite into the lead to close. That interference is the gas seal. It's also why nothing shifts when the gun rides muzzle down in a pocket for a month. Then barrel 2, then 3, then 4. 4 times. Unscrew, charge, seat, tighten. Standing on a moving deck in poor light with a gun that comes apart in your hands. And then the last step, which is the one people refuse to believe. You fill the pan with very fine priming powder, and you shake the pistol. Physically shake it, so the powder travels back down those vents and reaches each of the 4 chambers. The most advanced multi-shot handgun of its generation. And the final act of arming, it is giving it a good rattle. Close the steel down over the pan. Draw the cock back. Now it's live. Now count what isn't in this design. There is no second lock, no third or fourth, no bank of triggers, no selector, no timing mechanism of any kind. 1 cock, 1 frizzen, 1 mainspring, 1 pan. The hardest part of the problem, making 4 separate charges detonate in the same instant, never gets a mechanism at all. It gets solved by the fact that flame moving through a short channel is faster than anything a human hand can measure. You don't need to synchronize 4 ignitions. You just need 1 flash and 4 roads out of it. That's the kind of solution that never fits on a museum placard, which is a large part of why this channel exists, to pull these guns apart properly. If that's what you came for, subscribe, and we'll keep doing exactly this. Because the elegance has a bill attached, and it comes due in the same place. Those vents are the gun, and they are tiny. They have to stay clear, stay dry, and receive powder from a step performed by feel. In the dark, by a man who is probably already frightened. Fire it once and the channel's foul. Carry it at sea, and the air is wet enough to spoil a pan on its own. Shake it carelessly, and one chamber gets a full charge of priming while another gets a dusting. Then you pull the trigger, and 3 barrels speak. Or 2. You have no way of knowing which until it happens. The men who built these understood at least part of the danger, because the fixes are on the guns. On one English example, the sliding safety doesn't just block the trigger, it locks the pan shut, so a primed pistol full of loose powder can ride in a coat all day without emptying itself. There are belt hooks fitted to the frame, so the thing can be worn without a holster, which no holster maker of the period was building anyway. And there are the numbers. Barrels stamped 1 through 4 with matching numbers cut into the breeches beneath them, because these were hand-fitted parts, and each threaded barrel belonged to one chamber and no other. Mix them up while cleaning, and the seal, and the gun, stops being reliable. What there isn't, anywhere, is a standard. One London example carries barrels of 2.5 inches in .50. A York maker's runs 4 inches in .45. Another in brass stretches to 5.25. Barrel length doubles across surviving guns, caliber wanders, and nothing matches anything. No pattern, no contract, no specification, just individual makers building their own reading of the same strange idea. All of it rests on one assumption, that the 4 barrels fire as one. But suppose they do. Suppose the powder is dry, the vents are clear, the shake was honest, and all 4 chambers catch in the same thousandth of a second. Even on that day, the pistol has a second problem, and it isn't in the mechanism. It's in the angles. Lay a duck's foot pistol flat on a table and look down at it from above, and the fan is wider than you expect. On a typical example, the 4 barrels are splayed across an arc of roughly 60 degrees, 30 degrees off the center line in each direction. That number is the entire promise of the weapon. It's also the thing that destroys it. Because a fan doesn't stay a fan. It opens. And the further those 4 balls travel, the further apart they get, which sounds like exactly what you want until you do the arithmetic. Put a man 3 feet in front of the muzzles, arm's length. The 2 inner barrels put their balls about 6 inches to either side of your line, both of them inside his chest. The 2 outer barrels throw wide, roughly 20 inches out on each side, which is precisely where the men pressed up against him are standing. At 3 feet, this gun is devastating. 4 balls, 3 bodies, 1 trigger. Everything the design promised. Now let the same man take 3 steps back. At 10 feet, the pattern has opened to nearly 12 feet across. The outer balls are gone, almost 6 feet out on either side, into a bulkhead, into a doorframe, into nothing. And the 2 inner balls are now about 3.5 feet apart. A man's shoulders are less than 2 feet wide. So the man standing directly in front of you, the one you turned the pistol toward, the one you were looking at, is standing in the gap. 1 ball passes to his left. 1 passes to his right. He feels the air move. Push it out to 20 feet and the numbers stop being tragic and start being absurd. A pattern 23 feet wide with 7 feet of empty air between neighboring balls. You have discharged 4 shots into a crowd and hit a wall. And there's a consequence buried in that geometry that the sales pitch never mentions. The center of the pattern is empty. There is no barrel on the center line. The 2 inner bores angle away from it, which means that past a few feet, there is a corridor running straight out from the middle of this pistol, where nothing at all is traveling. Point it at a man's sternum from across a cabin, and the safest place in that cabin is directly in front of the gun. So the duck's foot has a working envelope, and it's brutally short, roughly the length of a dining table. Inside it, the weapon is exactly what the sales pitch claims. Outside it, the gaps between the balls become wider than the people you're trying to hit. And you cannot correct for any of this because you cannot aim it. There's nothing to aim. No single bore to line up, no meaningful point of impact. 4 divergent paths and an empty middle. You don't sight a duck's foot. You orient it. You turn your whole body toward a mass of people and hope the arc lands where the bodies are. The barrels themselves aren't helping. They're smoothbore and they're short, on some examples barely longer than a thumb, which means each individual ball is doing whatever it wants the moment it leaves the metal. Guns of this pattern that survived into the mid-19th century were remembered specifically for being severely inaccurate. And on at least one surviving pistol, there's false rifling cut into the muzzles. Grooves at the mouth of each bore, going nowhere, doing nothing, visible only to someone standing close and looking in. Hold that thought. Then there's what happens to the hand. 4 charges detonate at once against a small box lock frame designed around a grip meant for one fist. The recoil doesn't arrive as a push. It arrives as a hammer. And it's worse when the gun misbehaves. If 2 barrels catch a fraction ahead of the other 2, the force is no longer symmetrical, and the pistol twists in the hand while it's still firing. But the real cost isn't the recoil, or the pattern, or the accuracy. It's the second that comes afterwards, because there is no second shot. There is no cylinder to turn, no barrel to select, nothing held in reserve. One pull, and every chamber this weapon owns is empty. Reloading means dismantling it, barrel by barrel, thread by thread, which is a procedure measured in minutes, and minutes do not exist in a passageway full of angry men. And here is the part that makes it worse than an ordinary pistol. With a single-barrel gun, nobody knows. You could be loaded. You could be bluffing. The uncertainty is a weapon in itself, and it survives the moment. With a duck's foot, everyone can count. 4 muzzles visible from across the room. 1 flash. 1 report. And every man watching now knows, with total certainty, exactly how much danger he is no longer in. The smoke hangs in the low overhead. Someone is screaming, and the man who bought the most intimidating handgun in London is standing there holding a decorated iron club in front of people who have just watched him spend everything he had, which raises the question that makes this gun genuinely strange. If the physics were this bad, and they were, why did the finest makers in London and Dublin keep building them for decades? And why does almost every surviving example look like it was never fired at all? Go back to that false rifling. Grooves cut into the mouths of the bores, a fraction of an inch deep, doing nothing to the ball. They had no accuracy, no velocity. They had cost, skilled labor, and time at the bench. And there is exactly one position from which you can see them. Standing in front of the gun, close enough to look into the barrels. That is not a detail added for the owner. It's a detail added for the audience. And once you notice that, the entire weapon starts to make a different kind of sense. Because the duck's foot pistol was never really selling ballistics. It was selling a decision made by a stranger in about a second and a half at the front of a crowd. Consider who that crowd was. A mob in Georgian Britain was almost never a mob with firearms. Its weapons were whatever the street handed it: knives, clubs, cobblestones. Against men armed like that, psychology mattered more than physics. Now imagine facing a man with an ordinary pistol. He has one ball, and he has to choose. He points it at someone, and the moment he chooses, every other man in that room has been given permission, because it isn't him. The uncertainty collapses onto one person, and 30 others surge forward. 4 muzzles break that. Nobody in the front rank knows which barrel belongs to him. There is no single point of aim to read, no eye to follow down a sight, no way to work out whether you're the one. The threat doesn't land on an individual. It lands on a frontage. Every man in the first two ranks has to privately assume the answer is yes. And a mob is not a single creature. It's 40 men each doing quiet arithmetic. You don't have to stop the crowd. You have to make the arithmetic stop working for the 3 or 4 men at the front, because they're the ones who have to move first. 4 holes in a row does that better than any single pistol ever built. Which is why these guns look the way they do. Look at what survives. A walnut butt with silver wire scrolled into it. Frames covered in engraved martial trophies, flags, arms, drums. On one Irish example, a trigger guard engraved with a crossed bow and quiver, and a silver escutcheon on the grip left blank, waiting for a family crest that was never cut. Checkered butts, cut by hand. On a brass-barreled Bunny of London, a frigate engraved into the underside of the barrel block itself. A ship of the line, on the part of the gun that faces the owner's own body. None of that is functional. All of it is expensive. And they were sold in pairs. Matched, cased, numbered. One Oxford pair carries its barrels and breeches numbered 1 through 8, with silver hallmarks dating them to the late 1770s, almost entirely hand-built. A pair meant 8 balls instead of 4. It also meant a presentation object in a fitted case that a man could open on a table in front of someone. These weren't novelties from a backstreet trader. Bunny's firm ran from 1730 through 3 generations to 1815, with premises in Birmingham and London. Joiner, Collis of Oxford, Forth of York, established names, proof-marked work, signed locks. Serious makers. Building a gun with a flaw, a serious maker could not have missed. They kept building it anyway because the market kept asking. And the market, according to nearly every account, was a specific one. Wealthy buyers, more often than not, a naval officer or his family, buying against the possibility of mutiny. Bank guards, prison warders, ship's captains, men whose problem was never a duel and always a room. Here's where honesty is required, and it's the most interesting part of the whole story. That attribution is repeated everywhere, by dealers, by auction houses, by museums. What almost nobody can produce is a documented instance of a duck's foot pistol actually being fired to stop a mutiny. No log entry, no court record, no account from a man who used one. We have the guns. We have the story attached to the guns. The event in the middle is missing. And there's a straightforward reason to be suspicious of the whole premise, because a better answer already existed and was sitting in the same arms rack. The blunderbuss. One barrel loaded with a fistful of shot, or several loose balls. It threw a spread from a single bore, reloaded in one operation instead of 4, cost a fraction of a hand-fitted 4-barrel breech block, and every ship and coach in Britain already carried one. If your problem is genuinely a crowd at close range, in a confined space, the blunderbuss solves it more cheaply and more completely. So the duck's foot was never the efficient answer. It was the theatrical one, which means the best possible outcome for this pistol was that it never went off at all. Draw it, let the front rank see 4 holes and do the sum, and the weapon has won without spending anything. Fire it, and you have thrown away the only advantage you owned. A duck's foot in perfect condition isn't a gun that failed to see service. It might be a gun that worked exactly as intended. And that idea leads somewhere collectors have been arguing about for a very long time. Because if the value of this pistol was always in being looked at rather than used, there's an uncomfortable question waiting underneath it. What if that's still true today? The idea didn't stay still. It kept getting rebuilt by people trying to fix it. 4 barrels became the standard, but it was never the rule. Surviving examples run from 3 up to 7, and a 7-barrel duck's foot is a volley gun that fits in a coat. 4 won out because 4 is where the trade stops paying. More barrels means more frontage. but also more mass hanging off a small frame, and more charges going off at once against one wrist. Then the ignition changed, and the gun got a chance to answer its critics. By the middle of the 19th century, the percussion cap had replaced the flint. No pan, no priming powder, no shaking the gun to arm it. And the duck's foot survived the transition intact. There's a 3-barreled percussion example by W.B. Radney of London from around 1850, 38 caliber, each barrel still unscrewing from its own breech, still numbered to match. But look at how Radney arranged them. The center barrel points dead ahead. Only the outer two are angled off to the sides. That is a fix. Whoever laid out that breech block understood the old pattern had a hole down the middle and closed it. The gun would now hit the man you were actually looking at. And there's a second change, easy to miss and far more revealing. That pistol could be loaded with a ball in each barrel, or shot in each barrel, or shot in some and ball in others, in any combination the owner liked. Shot. 70 years on, the design was quietly turning into a scattergun, which is an admission. The spread everyone wanted had always been available from a handful of pellets and a single bore. By then, it was already over, for 3 reasons that arrived almost together. The first was the obvious one. Until workable revolver designs were perfected in the 1830s, the only way to raise a gun's rate of fire was to give it more barrels. After the 1830s, that stopped being true. 1 barrel, a rotating cylinder, shots delivered in sequence. Each one aimed, each one a separate decision. Everything the duck's foot had promised delivered honestly. The second was that the customer disappeared. When Britain built an effective police force in the 1840s, the private gentleman standing alone against a crowd stopped being a normal condition of life. The problem the pistol existed to solve got handed to somebody else. The third is the one that finishes it, and it's the same logic that made the gun work in the first place. A duck's foot deters by being counted. 4 muzzles, 4 shots, and everyone in the room does the sum. But a revolver in a coat pocket can't be counted. Nobody facing one knows whether there are 6 left or 1. The threat never visibly runs out, and against a crowd, an uncertain threat that persists beats a certain threat that ends. The revolver didn't just outshoot the duck's foot, it outfrightened it. A handful lingered anyway, some still in service at the outbreak of the American Civil War. Generations after the first were built. And then the object finished the journey it had been making all along. Genuine examples are scarce and expensive. A single well-preserved early 19th century specimen came up in London, carrying an estimate of 2,000 to 3,000 pounds. A match pair, judged authentic, early, by a known maker, and still functional, was valued at $45,000. Collectors authenticate them the way you would any hand-built object, matching numbers on barrels and breeches, London proof marks, datable silver hallmarks, a signed lock. And that scrutiny exists because of something nobody in this field has settled. There is an argument, ongoing and unresolved, about whether these guns are what the story says they are. The case against is an accumulation of absences. Very few originals exist. Period-written references to them are remarkably thin. And as we've seen, there is no documented account of one being used for the purpose everyone attributes to it. Some collectors have gone as far as suggesting the whole class was essentially invented, that the true duck's foot pistol is not a Georgian anti-mutiny weapon at all, but a later Victorian fantasy built for a market that wanted the story. The case for is physical, and it's strong. Hallmarks date individual guns to specific years in the 1770s and 1780s. Proof marks are genuine. The locks carry the names of real documented makers. These are not crude fabrications. So the honest verdict is narrower and stranger than either side. The guns are real. It's the legend that can't be verified. And there's a detail that sits on top of that argument and refuses to move. When that London specialist described his beautifully preserved example, he noted it looked as though it had never been fired, and said plainly that this remains a possibility, which is where you come in. This is an open question, and the comments on a video like this are usually sharper than the literature. If you've handled one, or found a period reference nobody cites, put it below, and subscribe, because the guns worth arguing about are the only ones we cover. Because 240 years on, nothing has actually changed. The duck's foot pistol still sits behind glass, still shows you 4 muzzles, and still asks you to believe what it could do, without ever having to prove it. It is doing the exact job it was built for.